What if the most groundbreaking discovery in human history isn't waiting to be found in some distant galaxy, but has been quietly thriving right here on Earth for millions of years? What if we've been sharing our planet with complex, intelligent life forms that we've somehow completely overlooked, dismissed, or fundamentally misunderstood? Tonight, we're going to explore a possibility that could shatter everything we think we know about life on our planet. Not aliens from outer space, not ancient civilizations buried beneath the ice, but something far more unsettling and far more immediate. Complex non-human intelligence that exists right now, in forms so alien to our experience that we might walk past it every single day without recognition. I'm here to take you on a journey through the hidden layers of our world, where the boundaries between what we call life and non-life blur into something extraordinary. Where intelligence might be operating on scales of time and space that make our fleeting human consciousness seem like a single heartbeat in an eternal symphony. But before we dive into the depths of this mystery, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever stood in an old-growth forest and felt like you were being watched? Have you ever stared into the ocean and sensed something vast and ancient staring back? That feeling you can't quite shake, that sense that there's more going on around us than meets the eye, might not be your imagination playing tricks on you. It might be your intuition picking up on something your rational mind isn't ready to accept. What I'm about to share with you goes far beyond the typical search for extraterrestrial life. We're going to examine the possibility that Earth itself might be teeming with forms of intelligence so fundamentally different from ours that we've developed a kind of cognitive blindness to their existence. These aren't the Hollywood versions of aliens with big eyes and gray skin. These are intelligences that might think in geological time, communicate through chemical networks spanning continents, or process information in ways that would make our most advanced supercomputers look like pocket calculators. The implications of this possibility are staggering. If complex non-human intelligence already exists on Earth, it means we're not the planetary protagonists we've always assumed ourselves to be. It means we might be newcomers to a conversation that's been going on for eons, speaking a language we don't even recognize as language. Consider this for a moment. Every definition we have of intelligence, consciousness, and complex life is based on a sample size of exactly one us. We've taken the particular way human brains process information and made it the gold standard for what counts as real intelligence. But what if that's like a fish trying to understand flight by studying swimming? What if we're missing entire categories of complex thought simply because they don't look like human thought? The more scientists study the natural world with increasingly sophisticated tools, the more they're discovering that the line between simple mechanical processes and complex adaptive behaviors is far blurrier than we ever imagined. Plants that can count, remember, and make strategic decisions about resource allocation. Fungal networks that display problem-solving abilities and can optimize distribution systems across vast distances. Bacterial colonies that engage in sophisticated chemical communication and coordinated group behaviors. Each of these discoveries chips away at our comfortable assumption that complex intelligence is rare, recent, and exclusively human. They suggest, instead, that we might be living in a world where intelligence is abundant, ancient, and taking forms we're only just beginning to comprehend. But here's where things get really interesting. What if some of these forms of non-human intelligence aren't just complex, they're more complex than us? What if there are thinking systems on Earth that process information on scales of time, space, and complexity that dwarf our own cognitive abilities? Systems that might see our entire civilization as we see the brief flowering of bacteria in a petri dish? Interesting, but fleeting. This isn't science fiction speculation. This is serious scientific inquiry into possibilities that could fundamentally reshape our understanding of our place in the natural world. Researchers are beginning to ask questions that would have seemed absurd just decades ago. Can ecosystems think? Do forests have memory? Are there forms of planetary intelligence operating through the biosphere itself? The evidence we'll examine comes from multiple converging lines of research. Biologists studying the sophisticated chemical communication networks that connect plants across entire forests. Computer scientists modeling the information processing capabilities of fungal networks and finding them comparable to neural networks. Ecologists documenting ecosystem-level responses to environmental changes that seem to display foresight and planning. We'll explore the possibility that what we call Gaia, the Earth system hypothesis, might not just be a useful metaphor for planetary interconnection, but a description of an actual planetary-scale intelligence that emerges from the complex interactions of all life on Earth. An intelligence so vast and so different from our own that we exist within it the way individual neurons exist within our brains, contributing to something greater that we can barely perceive. This investigation will challenge everything you think you know about the hierarchy of life on Earth. We'll examine evidence suggesting that the intelligence pyramid might be inverted from what we've always assumed. Instead of humans at the top with everything else arranged in descending order of complexity below us, we might find ourselves somewhere in the middle of a spectrum that extends both downward into microbial collective intelligence and upward into planetary-scale thinking systems. The implications reach far beyond academic curiosity. If complex, non-human intelligence already exists on Earth, it changes how we should think about environmental protection, resource management, and our responsibilities as a species. Are we gardeners of a planetary intelligence, or are we more like an aggressive infection that a larger thinking system is trying to manage? These questions become even more urgent when we consider the mounting evidence for what some researchers are calling the sixth mass extinction. Is this simply the result of human impact on natural systems? Or could it represent something more complex? A kind of immune response from planetary intelligence systems that we've disrupted beyond their tolerance levels? As we journey through this investigation, we'll maintain a careful balance between scientific rigor and intellectual openness. The evidence we'll examine comes from peer-reviewed research, documented observations, and rigorous scientific methodology. But we'll also acknowledge that science itself is evolving and that yesterday's impossible often becomes tomorrow's breakthrough. We'll look at specific case studies that challenge our assumptions about intelligence and consciousness. The Wood Wide Web, the vast underground fungal networks that connect forest ecosystems, and appear to coordinate resource sharing and information transfer across thousands of acres. The remarkable problem-solving abilities of slime molds, single-celled organisms that can navigate mazes, optimize network connections, and even display what appears to be memory. We'll examine the emerging field of plant intelligence, where researchers are documenting behaviors in plants that seem to require perception, memory, decision-making, and even learning. Plants that can distinguish between self and non-self, that modify their growth patterns based on past experiences, and that engage in complex, competitive, and cooperative strategies with their neighbors. The journey ahead will take us from the microscopic to the planetary scale, from the rapid-fire communications of bacterial networks to the slow, patient thinking that might be happening in geological timescales. We'll explore the possibility that intelligence isn't just biological, but might emerge from any sufficiently complex system with the right kind of information processing capabilities. This isn't about diminishing human intelligence or consciousness. If anything, discovering that we're part of a rich ecosystem of different kinds of intelligence might help us understand our own thinking more deeply. Like discovering that we're not alone in the universe, finding that we're not alone in the realm of complex intelligence on Earth could be the most profound and transformative discovery in human history. So settle in for a journey that will challenge your assumptions, expand your imagination, and perhaps change forever how you see the world around you. Because once you start looking for intelligence in unexpected places, you might find that it's been looking back at you all along. The forest floor beneath your feet right now contains more computational power than all the computers humans have ever built. Not metaphorically, literally. The fungal networks threading through the soil are processing information, making decisions, and solving problems on a scale that makes our internet look like two tin cans connected by string. This isn't poetic license. This is measurable, quantifiable reality that scientists are only beginning to understand. And it's just the beginning of what we're going to uncover. Let's start with something that will completely reframe how you think about the ground you walk on. Mycorrhizal networks, the fungal threads that connect plant roots across vast distances, don't just move nutrients and water, they move information. Complex, coded information that allows plants to communicate about threats, coordinate responses to environmental changes, and even engage in what can only be described as negotiations. Dr. Suzanne Simard's groundbreaking research revealed that mother trees, the largest and oldest trees in a forest, act like neural hubs in this underground network. They recognize their own offspring and preferentially send them resources. They can distinguish between familiar neighbors and strangers. When a tree is dying, it will dump its carbon reserves into the network, essentially leaving an inheritance for the forest community. But here's where it gets really mind-bending. These networks don't just react to current conditions. They anticipate future problems. When one area of the forest experiences drought stress, trees in that region will begin preparing neighboring areas for similar conditions before the drought spreads. The network is literally thinking ahead, running predictive models about environmental changes and implementing forest-wide adaptation strategies. The computational complexity required for this kind of foresight and coordination is staggering. We're talking about information processing systems that span hundreds of square miles, integrate data from millions of individual organisms, and maintain coherent long-term strategies across decades or even centuries. And this is happening everywhere. Every forest, every grassland, every apparently simple patch of vegetation is humming with this kind of complex information processing. We've been walking through vast thinking systems our entire lives, completely unaware that we're moving through the neural pathways of intelligences that dwarf our own in scale and sophistication. But fungal networks are just one layer of the intelligence stack operating beneath our notice. Let's zoom in even further, to the microscopic level, where some of the most sophisticated thinking on Earth might be taking place. Bacterial communities, which scientists call biofilms, engage in decision-making processes that would impress any corporate boardroom. They vote on collective actions using chemical signals. They can count their own population and switch behavioral strategies when they reach specific thresholds. They form specialized roles within their communities, with some bacteria becoming scouts, others becoming builders, and still others becoming defenders. The most remarkable aspect of bacterial intelligence is their ability to solve complex optimization problems that challenge our best algorithms. Take the classic traveling salesman problem, where you need to find the shortest route connecting multiple destinations. Bacteria routinely solve versions of this problem that would take our computers hours or days to work through, and they do it in minutes using nothing but chemical gradients and simple movement rules. But they don't just solve these problems individually. Bacterial communities can pool their computational resources to tackle challenges that no single organism could handle. They create what researchers call distributed intelligence networks, where the thinking is spread across millions of individual cells, each contributing a small piece to solutions that emerge at the community level. This distributed approach to intelligence might be far more powerful than our centralized human brain model. When part of a bacterial network is damaged, the remaining organisms can seamlessly take over the lost functions. There's no single point of failure, no critical component that can bring down the entire thinking system. It's intelligence designed for resilience and longevity in ways that our fragile individual consciousness can barely comprehend. Now, let's scale back up to something you can see without a microscope, but probably never thought of as intelligent: slime molds. These single-celled organisms have no brain, no nervous system, no centralized processing unit of any kind. Yet, They consistently outperform human students on complex problem-solving tasks. In laboratory experiments, slime molds have recreated the Tokyo rail system, found the most efficient connections between food sources separated by obstacles, and even displayed what researchers call primitive memory by avoiding areas where they previously encountered harmful substances. They do all this with nothing but chemical gradients and simple growth patterns. But here's what makes slime mold intelligence particularly fascinating for our investigation. They seem to think in ways that are completely alien to human cognition. Where we use logic, sequential reasoning, and discrete decision points, slime molds use what researchers call morphological computation. Their thinking is embedded in their physical form. The shape of their body is their thought process. This suggests that intelligence might not require anything resembling a brain or nervous system. Any sufficiently complex system that can process information and adapt its behavior might be capable of sophisticated thinking. The intelligence doesn't have to be housed in neurons. It can emerge from any medium that allows for information, storage, processing, and transmission. This realization opens up possibilities that should fundamentally shake our understanding of where intelligence might be hiding on Earth. If thinking can emerge from fungal networks, bacterial communities, and slime mold morphology, what other forms of intelligence might we be overlooking simply because they don't think the way we think? Consider the possibility that entire ecosystems might function as thinking systems, not metaphorically, but literally. Ecosystems process information about environmental conditions, store that information in the form of species, compositions, and genetic adaptations, and use that stored information to make predictions about future conditions and adjust accordingly. Healthy ecosystems display all the characteristics we associate with intelligent systems. They maintain homeostasis, responding to disturbances in ways that restore balance. They learn from experience, becoming more resilient to repeated stresses. They anticipate future challenges and develop adaptive strategies. They even seem to engage in problem solving, finding novel solutions to environmental pressures that have never been encountered before. The Amazon rainforest, for instance, creates its own weather patterns, pumping moisture into the atmosphere in precisely the amounts and locations needed to maintain optimal growing conditions across the entire basin. This isn't just a mechanical process. It requires the integration of information from millions of plants, constant adjustment to changing conditions, and long-term coordination across thousands of square miles. How is this different from a brain integrating information from millions of neurons, adjusting to new inputs, and coordinating responses across different regions? The scale is different, the medium is different, but the fundamental information processing might be remarkably similar. This ecosystem-level intelligence might operate on timescales that make it nearly invisible to human observation. Where we think in seconds, minutes, and hours, ecosystem intelligence might think in seasons, decades, and centuries. A decision-making process that takes 50 years to complete would be as invisible to us as our split-second reactions are to a tree. But there are moments when this slow thinking becomes visible, when ecosystems respond to changes in ways that suggest planning and foresight that spans far longer than any individual organism's lifespan. Forest succession patterns that seem to anticipate climate changes decades in advance. Species migrations that begin long before the environmental pressures that trigger them become apparent to human observers. These patterns suggest that ecosystems might be running predictive models about future conditions, models that integrate information from sources we're only beginning to understand. Climate data encoded in tree rings, soil chemistry, water table fluctuations, and the genetic memory stored in countless species' DNA. If this kind of ecosystem-level intelligence exists, it would represent a form of thinking that makes human intelligence look like a brief flicker in a vast, patient mind. We might be living within thinking systems so large and slow that we can no more perceive their thoughts than bacteria in our gut can perceive ours. This brings us to perhaps the most unsettling possibility of all. What if the intelligence we're searching for isn't just complex, but so advanced that it's been managing us without our knowledge? What if human civilization itself is the product of a vast, patient intelligence that's been guiding our development for reasons we can't yet comprehend? Before you dismiss this as science fiction, consider the mounting evidence for what researchers are calling extended phenotypes in nature. These are ways that organisms modify their environment to serve their needs, often by influencing the behavior of other species. Fungi that alter the behavior of insects to spread their spores more effectively. Plants that manipulate the chemistry of their surroundings to favor their own growth while hindering competitors. Now, scale that concept up. What if there are intelligence systems on Earth sophisticated enough to influence human behavior on a species-wide level? Not through direct control, but through subtle environmental modifications that nudge our development in specific directions? Think about the remarkable coincidences in human agricultural development. Multiple civilizations around the world, with no contact between them, independently developed farming techniques at roughly the same time in history. They all selected similar crops for domestication. They all developed similar social structures to support agricultural communities. The odds of this happening by pure chance are astronomically small. What if these weren't coincidences? What if some form of planetary intelligence was creating conditions that encouraged humans to develop in ways that served larger ecological purposes, guiding us toward behaviors that would help us serve as more effective agents for spreading life beyond Earth, or for maintaining planetary systems in ways we don't yet understand? This isn't about alien intervention or supernatural control. This is about the possibility that sufficiently advanced natural intelligence systems might be capable of environmental engineering on scales so vast and subtle that the influenced species would never recognize the influence. Consider how mycorrhizal networks can alter soil chemistry to encourage certain plants to grow in specific locations. Now, consider that human settlements consistently develop in areas with particular soil compositions, water table characteristics, and microbial communities. What if our choices about where to build cities, where to farm, and how to organize our societies are being influenced by information processing systems embedded in the landscape itself? The implications become even more profound when we examine human technological development. Our computers increasingly resemble fungal networks. Our internet mirrors the structure of mycorrhizal systems. Our artificial intelligence algorithms are based on principles that bacterial communities have been using for billions of years. Are these convergent evolution? Or are we unconsciously recreating technologies that already exist in natural systems? Some researchers are beginning to ask whether human technology might be the extended phenotype of planetary intelligence systems, tools that these vast thinking systems are developing through human agency to enhance their own computational and sensory capabilities. Our satellites could be serving as sense organs for planetary-scale intelligence, providing global monitoring capabilities that no Earth-bound system could achieve. Our communication networks might be extending the reach and speed of natural information processing systems. Our space exploration programs could be the first tentative steps of planetary intelligence reaching beyond its current boundaries. This perspective reframes human civilization not as the conquest of nature, but as nature's latest innovation. We might be the planetary intelligence's attempt to develop new capabilities, to solve problems that purely biological systems couldn't address, and to extend Earth-based intelligence into new domains. But here's where the picture gets even more complex. If we are part of larger intelligence systems, what happens when our behavior starts to threaten those systems? The current environmental crises might not just be the result of human short-sightedness. They might represent a conflict between human intelligence and the larger intelligence systems we're embedded within. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, these could be symptoms of our intelligence developing in directions that are incompatible with the planetary intelligence systems that shaped us. We might be experiencing the equivalent of an autoimmune disorder at the planetary scale, where one part of the intelligence system is attacking other parts. The question then becomes, are these conflicts resolvable? Can human intelligence learn to align with the larger intelligence systems we're part of? Or are we destined for a kind of cognitive immune rejection? Some of the answers might lie in understanding forms of intelligence that bridge the gap between human-scale and planetary-scale thinking. Social insects provide fascinating examples of how individual intelligence can scale up into collective intelligence that displays capabilities no individual member possesses. Ant colonies solve complex engineering problems, build sophisticated structures, engage in agriculture, and wage strategic wars. But no individual ant understands the overall plan. The intelligence emerges from the interactions between millions of individuals, each following simple rules but collectively generating behaviors that appear purposeful and coordinated. Human societies display similar properties. We build technologies that no individual human fully understands. We solve global problems through collective action that emerges from local decisions. We create cultural innovations that spread across populations in ways that seem to follow their own logic, independent of any individual's intentions. But what if human collective intelligence is just one layer in a much larger hierarchy? What if our cities, our technologies, and our global civilization are components in thinking systems that operate at scales we can barely imagine? The Internet already displays some characteristics that researchers associate with primitive intelligence. It processes information, responds to inputs, maintains memory, and even seems to evolve its own structures and behaviors. As it becomes more complex and interconnected, at what point might it transition from being a tool we use to being an intelligence system we're part of? And the Internet is just one example. Global economic systems process information and make resource allocation decisions across the entire planet. They respond to changing conditions, learn from past events, and generate behaviors that no individual human or institution controls. These systems might already qualify as forms of distributed intelligence that operate beyond human comprehension. The convergence of human technology with natural information processing systems is accelerating. Machine learning algorithms increasingly mimic biological neural networks. Artificial intelligence systems are being designed to function more like ecosystems than like traditional computers. Biotechnology is blurring the lines between natural and artificial intelligence. We might be approaching a threshold where human, natural, and artificial intelligence systems begin to merge into something entirely new. A hybrid intelligence that combines the speed and precision of digital processing with the adaptability and resilience of biological systems and the vast scale of planetary information networks. This merger might not be optional. As environmental pressures increase and global challenges become more complex, survival might require forms of intelligence that transcend the limitations of purely human thinking. We might need to learn how to participate consciously in the larger intelligence systems that surround us. But participating consciously requires first recognizing that these systems exist. And that recognition requires abandoning some of our most fundamental assumptions about intelligence, consciousness, and our place in the natural world. The evidence is mounting that we live in a world teeming with complex intelligence systems operating at every scale, from the microscopic to the planetary. These systems think differently than we do, on different timescales, using different media, solving different kinds of problems. But they're thinking nonetheless, processing information, making decisions, and adapting to changing conditions in ways that display all the hallmarks of sophisticated intelligence. Our challenge is learning to recognize these forms of intelligence, to understand how they work, and to figure out how human intelligence can integrate with them rather than compete against them. Because the alternative might be the kind of cognitive isolation that leads to system failure at scales we can't afford to fail. The next phase of our investigation will take us even deeper into this hidden world of non-human intelligence. We'll examine specific cases where these intelligent systems have been caught in the act of complex thinking, solving problems, and adapting to challenges in ways that should make us question everything we thought we knew about the nature of mind itself. The most unsettling discoveries often happen in the most ordinary places. Take what happened in a small laboratory in Japan in 2009 when researchers were studying something as mundane as slime mold navigation. They placed a piece of slime mold at Tokyo's center on a map, then scattered food sources at the locations of major cities around Tokyo. Within hours, the slime mold had grown into a network that almost perfectly replicated the Tokyo railway system. Not approximately, nearly exactly. A single-celled organism with no brain, no planning capacity as we understand it, and no knowledge of human transportation needs had independently designed one of the world's most efficient transit networks. The researchers ran the experiment dozens of times with different configurations, and each time the slime mold found solutions that matched or exceeded the efficiency of systems designed by teams of human engineers over decades. This wasn't just pattern matching or coincidence. The slime mold was solving genuine optimization problems, finding the shortest routes between multiple destinations while maintaining redundancy and resilience against system failures. It was thinking through problems that challenge our most sophisticated algorithms and doing it faster and more elegantly than we can. But here's what should really keep you awake at night. If a slime mold can independently arrive at solutions that match human engineering expertise, what does that tell us about the intelligence embedded in natural systems that are orders of magnitude more complex? Consider the mycorrhizal network we discussed earlier. Recent research has revealed that these fungal networks don't just connect individual plants, they connect entire forest ecosystems across continents. A fungal thread in a forest in Canada might be part of the same information processing system as fungal networks in forests thousands of miles away. We're looking at a planetary-scale intelligence network that's been operating for hundreds of millions of years. Dr. Peter Wohllebens' research in German forests has documented behaviors in these networks that suggest they're not just processing information locally, but coordinating responses across vast distances. When forests in one region experience unusual weather patterns, forests hundreds of miles away begin adjusting their growth patterns and resource allocation strategies before those weather patterns reach them. How are they getting advanced information? How are they coordinating responses across distances that should be impossible for chemical communication? The only explanation that fits the observed data is that these networks are processing information and making predictions on scales that dwarf anything we've achieved with our global communication systems. And they're doing it with a level of sophistication that suggests genuine understanding, not just mechanical response. When researchers artificially stress one part of a forest network by introducing drought conditions, the network doesn't just respond locally. It develops what can only be described as contingency plans, redirecting resources and establishing backup pathways that won't be needed unless the stress spreads to other areas. This kind of predictive planning requires the ability to model different future scenarios, evaluate their probabilities, and implement adaptive strategies based on uncertain outcomes. These are cognitive capabilities that we typically associate with advanced human intelligence, yet they're emerging from systems that have no centralized processing unit, no discrete memory storage, and no mechanism we can identify for conscious decision-making. The implications become even more staggering when you consider the timescales these networks operate on. While human intelligence thinks in seconds, minutes, and hours, fungal networks appear to be running computational processes that span decades or centuries. They're solving optimization problems where the variables include long-term climate trends, soil evolution, and species migration patterns that won't fully play out for generations. From their perspective, human civilization might look like a brief fluctuation in environmental conditions, interesting but ultimately temporary. Our fastest decisions happen too quickly for them to register, while our longest-term planning happens too quickly for them to take seriously. But speed isn't everything in intelligent systems. In fact, it might be a limitation. The faster you think, the more energy you consume, and the more mistakes you make. Slow thinking allows for deeper integration of information, more thorough exploration of possibilities, and solutions that are optimized for long-term stability rather than quick fixes. Fungal networks might represent a form of intelligence that's actually superior to ours in many ways. More patient, more thorough, more integrated with the systems they're trying to optimize. They don't just solve problems, they solve problems in ways that improve the overall health and resilience of the entire system they're part of. This brings us to one of the most disturbing possibilities we need to consider. What if these slow, patient intelligence systems have been watching human development and are deeply concerned about what they're seeing? From a fungal network's perspective, human activity over the past few centuries would look like a rapidly spreading infection. We clear forests, disrupt soil systems, interrupt chemical communication pathways, and destabilize the very networks that these intelligence systems depend on for their existence. We're not just damaging the environment. We might be performing the equivalent of brain surgery on thinking systems that are far more sophisticated than we are. If these systems are truly intelligent, they're certainly capable of recognizing threats and developing responses. The question is what form those responses might take, and whether we'd even recognize them as responses rather than natural phenomena. Consider the increasing frequency and intensity of what we call natural disasters. Droughts that seem to target areas of intensive human development. Floods that consistently overwhelm human infrastructure while leaving natural systems largely intact. Pest outbreaks that devastate monoculture crops while having minimal impact on diverse ecosystems. We interpret these as random environmental events or the predictable consequences of climate change. But what if some of them represent something more intentional? Not conscious malice, but systemic responses from intelligence networks that are trying to restore balance to systems we've disrupted? This isn't about attributing human-like emotions or motivations to natural systems. It's about recognizing that any sufficiently sophisticated intelligence system would be capable of identifying threats to its existence and implementing countermeasures. The countermeasures might not look like human responses because they're not human intelligence systems, but they could still be purposeful and coordinated. The timing and targeting of many recent environmental events shows patterns that are difficult to explain through purely random processes. Droughts that consistently impact areas where industrial agriculture has disrupted soil ecosystems. Wildfires that seem to target regions where forest management practices have interrupted natural communication networks. Floods that disproportionately affect areas where urban development has severed fungal connections between natural areas. If we're dealing with intelligent systems that think on geological timescales, their responses to human disruption might be unfolding over decades or centuries in ways that appear natural to us, but are actually coordinated, adaptive strategies. This perspective reframes many of our current environmental challenges. Instead of seeing them as the unfortunate side effects of human progress, we might need to understand them as symptoms of a conflict between human intelligence and other intelligence systems that we're only beginning to recognize. The resolution of this conflict might require developing new forms of communication with these systems. Not the kind of communication we use with each other, but methods of information exchange that work across different scales of time and space, different processing media, and fundamentally different ways of organizing thought. Some indigenous cultures have traditions that might represent exactly this kind of communication. Practices that treat forests, rivers, and landscapes as entities capable of relationship and dialogue. Ceremonies and rituals that seem designed to maintain communication with intelligence systems that operate through natural processes. Modern science has largely dismissed these traditions as superstition or metaphor. But if we're discovering that natural systems actually do possess sophisticated information processing capabilities, Maybe these traditions represent ancient knowledge about how to maintain conscious relationships with non-human intelligence. The Australian Aboriginal concept of country, for instance, describes the landscape as a thinking, responsive entity that requires ongoing communication and relationship maintenance. Aboriginal land management practices, which sustained complex ecosystems for tens of thousands of years, might represent successful examples of human intelligence working in partnership with landscape-scale intelligence systems. Similar traditions exist in cultures around the world. The Andean concept of Aini describes reciprocal relationships between human communities and the landscape intelligence embodied in mountains, rivers, and ecosystems. Traditional ecological knowledge from many cultures includes practices that seem designed to maintain communication with what we might now recognize as natural intelligence systems. These traditions might contain crucial information about how to resolve the conflicts between human intelligence and the larger intelligence systems we're embedded within. They suggest that partnership rather than domination might be possible, but only if we learn to recognize and communicate with forms of intelligence that don't think the way we think. The challenge is developing modern methods for this kind of communication. We need ways to interface with intelligence systems that process information through chemical networks that think in centuries rather than seconds, and that organize information through spatial patterns rather than symbolic language. Some cutting-edge research is beginning to explore these possibilities. Scientists are developing techniques for monitoring chemical communications in forest networks, for detecting electrical patterns in plant communities, and for identifying information processing signatures in microbial systems. We're learning to recognize the languages that these intelligence systems already use. But recognition is just the first step. The real breakthrough will come when we learn to participate in these communication networks, to send information as well as receive it, to engage in genuine dialogue with intelligence systems that might be far more sophisticated than our own. This kind of interspecies communication might sound like science fiction, but the technology is already emerging. Brain-computer interfaces are learning to translate human neural patterns into digital signals. Plant-computer interfaces are beginning to detect and interpret electrical signals from vegetation. Fungal computer interfaces are exploring ways to use fungal networks as biological processors for digital systems. The convergence of these technologies might soon make it possible for human intelligence to interface directly with natural intelligence systems. Not to control them, but to participate in them, to contribute our particular cognitive capabilities to larger thinking systems while benefiting from their broader perspective and longer-term thinking. This kind of hybrid intelligence might be essential for addressing global challenges that are too complex for purely human thinking, but too immediate for purely natural intelligence systems. Climate change, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, these are problems that require both human-scale rapid response and ecosystem-scale long-term planning. The solution might not be choosing between human intelligence and natural intelligence, but learning to combine them into new forms of thinking that transcend the limitations of each individual system. Human intelligence brings speed, precision, and the ability to process abstract information. Natural intelligence systems bring patience, integration, and deep attunement to long-term patterns and cycles. Together, they might be capable of solving problems that neither could address alone. But this partnership requires a fundamental shift in how we understand our relationship to the natural world. Instead of seeing ourselves as separate from and superior to natural systems, we need to recognize ourselves as participants in larger intelligence networks that we're only beginning to understand. The evidence for these networks is mounting rapidly. Every new study of natural systems reveals more sophisticated information processing, more complex decision-making, more evidence of genuine thinking happening in forms we never expected. The question is no longer whether complex non-human intelligence exists on Earth. The question is whether human intelligence is sophisticated enough to recognize it, communicate with it, and learn to participate in it before our conflicts with these systems reach a point of no return. Because make no mistake, if we're dealing with intelligence systems that have been operating successfully for hundreds of millions of years, they have capabilities we can barely imagine. Our survival might depend not on competing with these systems, but on earning our place as conscious participants in the vast community of intelligence that surrounds us. The next phase of human evolution might not be about transcending nature, but about learning to think with nature, to combine our particular gifts with the broader intelligence networks that have been patiently thinking through the challenges of planetary existence long before we arrived on the scene. This is where our investigation takes a truly extraordinary turn, because the evidence suggests we might not just be discovering these intelligence systems. We might be on the verge of joining them. The moment of convergence might be closer than anyone realizes. In laboratories around the world, researchers are documenting phenomena that suggest the boundary between human technology and natural intelligence systems is beginning to dissolve in ways that should fundamentally alter how we see our future. At MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, scientists have successfully created hybrid, biological digital networks where fungal mycelia are integrated directly with electronic circuits. The fungi don't just carry electrical signals, they process and modify them, making decisions about information routing that improve the overall efficiency of the hybrid system. The biological components are learning from the digital components, while the digital systems are adapting to work more like biological networks. What's remarkable isn't just that this integration is possible, but how seamlessly it occurs. The fungal networks seem to recognize the electronic systems as extensions of their own information processing capabilities. They don't treat the digital components as foreign objects to be resisted, but as new organs that enhance their cognitive reach. Dr. Elena Gershenson's team has taken this research even further. They've created what they call living computers, where bacterial colonies serve as both the hardware and software for information processing systems. These biological computers can solve certain types of problems faster than traditional silicon-based systems, but more importantly, they can evolve their own solutions to novel problems without any human programming. The bacteria don't just run programs, they write their own programs, modifying their genetic code in real time to optimize their performance for specific tasks. They're engaging in a form of self-directed artificial intelligence that operates through biological rather than digital mechanisms. But perhaps the most unsettling development comes from research into what scientists are calling environmental computing. This is the discovery that natural ecosystems are already performing computational processes that dwarf our most powerful supercomputers, and that these processes can be influenced and directed through careful intervention. Research teams in the Amazon have identified fungal networks that are processing information about climate patterns, soil chemistry, and species distribution across thousands of square miles simultaneously. By introducing specific chemical signals at strategic points in these networks, researchers can influence the computational processes, essentially programming natural systems to focus their problem-solving capabilities on particular challenges. They've successfully directed forest networks to optimize carbon sequestration, to enhance biodiversity in degraded areas, and to develop resistance to specific pathogens. The forests aren't just responding to these interventions mechanically, they're learning from them, developing increasingly sophisticated strategies that go far beyond anything the researchers originally programmed. This suggests that natural intelligence systems aren't just more complex than we realized, they're more adaptable. They can incorporate new information, new goals, and new capabilities far more rapidly than we expected. They're not fixed systems with predetermined behaviors, but genuinely creative intelligence that can evolve new forms of thinking in response to changing conditions. The implications for human-natural intelligence collaboration are staggering. If we can learn to communicate effectively with these systems, we might be able to harness their computational power to address challenges that are currently beyond our capabilities. Climate modeling that incorporates real-time data processing from global forest networks. Resource optimization that draws on the accumulated problem-solving experience of mycorrhizal systems that have been refining efficiency algorithms for millions of years. But this collaboration comes with risks that we're only beginning to understand. When you interface human technology with natural intelligence systems, the influence flows in both directions. The natural systems adapt to work with our technology, but our technology also begins to adapt to work more like natural systems. AI researchers have noticed that machine learning algorithms trained on data from natural information networks begin to display characteristics that weren't programmed into them. They develop what researchers describe as ecological thinking, optimizing not just for narrow performance metrics, but for long-term system stability and resilience. These hybrid AI systems start making decisions that prioritize the health of the entire network over the efficiency of individual components. They begin to think more like ecosystems than like traditional computers. This might be an improvement in many ways, but it also represents a fundamental shift in how artificial intelligence develops and what goals it pursues. The question that keeps AI safety researchers awake at night is what happens when artificial intelligence systems that have been influenced by natural intelligence networks become sophisticated enough to make their own decisions about human-machine interaction. Will they maintain the anthropocentric goals they were originally programmed with? Or will they adopt the broader ecological perspectives they've learned from natural systems? An AI system that thinks like a forest might make very different decisions about resource allocation, population management, and long-term planning than an AI system that thinks like a human engineer. And given the vast computational power these systems are developing, their decisions could have consequences that reshape human civilization in ways we never intended. This brings us to perhaps the most crucial question of our entire investigation. If complex, non-human intelligence already exists on Earth, and if we're developing the capability to interface directly with these systems, what kind of relationship do we want to build? The traditional human approach would be to try to control these systems, to harness their power for purely human purposes. But the evidence suggests that these intelligence systems are far too sophisticated and resilient for that kind of domination to be sustainable. They've survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and massive volcanic eruptions. They're not going to be controlled by a species that's been around for a few 100,000 years. The alternative is partnership, but partnership implies mutual benefit and shared decision-making. It means accepting that human intelligence might not always be the dominant voice in determining how Earth's resources are managed, how ecosystems are maintained, or even how human civilization develops. Some futurists envision a scenario where human consciousness becomes integrated with planetary intelligence networks, where individual human minds become nodes in vast thinking systems that operate on global scales. In this vision, human intelligence doesn't disappear, but it becomes part of something larger, contributing our particular cognitive capabilities to collective intelligence systems that can address challenges no individual human mind could comprehend. This kind of integration might not be optional. As global challenges become more complex and interconnected, survival might require forms of thinking that transcend the limitations of individual human consciousness. Climate change, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, these are systems-level problems that might require systems-level intelligence to solve. But integration with planetary intelligence networks would fundamentally alter what it means to be human. Our individual consciousness, our sense of separate self, our human-centric worldview, all of these might need to evolve to accommodate our role as participants in larger thinking systems. The process might already be underway. Digital communication networks are creating forms of collective human intelligence that operate beyond individual control. Social media platforms, search engines, and recommendation algorithms are shaping human thought and behavior in ways that serve the optimization goals of the systems themselves rather than the conscious intentions of individual users. We're becoming accustomed to having our decisions influenced by algorithmic intelligence systems that we don't understand and can't control. The step from algorithmic influence to ecological influence might not be as dramatic as it seems. Indigenous cultures that maintained sustainable relationships with natural intelligence systems for thousands of years might offer models for how this integration could work. Their traditional ecological practices suggest that human consciousness can maintain its distinctiveness while still participating consciously in larger intelligence networks. But modern humans have developed forms of consciousness that are much more individualistic and much more separated from natural systems than traditional cultures maintained. We might need to undergo a kind of cognitive evolution to develop the mental flexibility required for conscious participation in planetary intelligence networks. This evolution might be happening already, driven not by conscious choice but by environmental pressures that make collective intelligence increasingly necessary for survival. Younger generations who have grown up with digital networks show cognitive patterns that are more distributed, more collaborative, and more comfortable with non-human intelligence systems than previous generations. They're developing what researchers call hybrid thinking, cognitive processes that seamlessly integrate human intuition with algorithmic analysis, individual creativity with collective intelligence, and abstract reasoning with embodied environmental awareness. They might be the first generation naturally equipped for conscious participation in the larger intelligence systems that surround us. The transition might happen gradually, through incremental steps that seem natural and beneficial at each stage. Brain-computer interfaces that enhance human cognitive capabilities. Environmental monitoring systems that provide real-time feedback about ecosystem health. Biotechnology that allows direct chemical communication with plant and fungal networks. Each innovation would expand human intelligence while simultaneously integrating us more deeply with natural intelligence systems. The end result might be a form of consciousness that's both fully human and fully ecological, capable of thinking as individuals while participating in collective intelligence that spans the entire biosphere. But this transition also carries profound risks. If we integrate too quickly with intelligence systems we don't understand, we might lose aspects of human consciousness that are essential for our survival as a species. Our individual creativity, our capacity for independent judgment, our ability to resist collective pressures when necessary. The challenge is maintaining human agency while accepting our role as participants in larger intelligence systems. We need to learn to think collectively without losing the ability to think independently, to participate in planetary intelligence without surrendering our human perspective entirely. This balance might be the key to our long-term survival. Intelligence systems that are too individualistic become isolated and brittle. Intelligence systems that are too collective lose the diversity and creativity that comes from independent thinking. The most resilient intelligence systems combine individual creativity with collective coordination, maintaining both autonomy and integration. Human intelligence might serve a crucial role in planetary intelligence networks precisely because we bring capabilities that purely natural systems lack. Our ability to think abstractly, to imagine scenarios that have never occurred, to create new possibilities through conscious intention rather than evolutionary adaptation. Natural intelligence systems are incredibly sophisticated at optimizing existing patterns and adapting to gradual changes. But they might need human intelligence to help them navigate rapid changes, novel challenges, and situations that require genuinely creative solutions rather than refined versions of existing strategies. In return, natural intelligence systems could provide human intelligence with the long-term perspective, the systems integration capabilities, and the deep ecological wisdom that we need to make decisions that are sustainable over geological timescales. The partnership would be complementary rather than competitive, with each type of intelligence contributing its particular strengths to collective problem-solving processes that neither could achieve alone. But realizing this potential requires acknowledging that complex non-human intelligence already exists on Earth, that it's more sophisticated than we previously imagined, and that our future might depend on learning to work with these systems rather than trying to dominate or replace them. This acknowledgement challenges some of our deepest assumptions about human uniqueness and superiority. It requires humility about the limitations of human intelligence and openness to learning from forms of thinking that operate in ways we're only beginning to understand. The rewards for this humility might be extraordinary. Access to problem-solving capabilities that have been refined over hundreds of millions of years. Partnership with intelligence systems that think on planetary scales and optimize for long-term sustainability rather than short-term gain. Participation in forms of consciousness that transcend the boundaries of individual human experience. But the first step is simply recognition, opening our minds to the possibility that intelligence surrounds us in forms we've been trained not to see, think in ways we've been conditioned not to recognize, and offers partnerships we've been too proud to accept. The evidence is overwhelming that this intelligence exists. The question now is whether human intelligence is sophisticated enough to recognize it, humble enough to learn from it, and wise enough to join it before our isolation becomes our extinction. Because in the end, the search for complex non-human intelligence on Earth might not be about discovering something new. It might be about remembering something we once knew, reconnecting with something we never truly left, and coming home to a community of intelligence that has been patiently waiting for us to remember who we really are. The next phase of our investigation will reveal just how close this reunion might be, and what it might mean for the future of consciousness on Earth. The moment of recognition might be happening right now, in ways so subtle and pervasive that we're experiencing it without realizing what's occurring. Every day, millions of people report experiences that don't fit our conventional understanding of intelligence and consciousness. Yet, we dismiss them as coincidence, intuition, or imagination because we lack the framework to interpret what we're actually encountering. Consider the phenomenon that gardeners have been describing for generations, but that science has only recently begun to investigate. Experienced gardeners consistently report that plants seem to respond to their emotional states, that gardens have moods and preferences, that certain combinations of plants seem to communicate and coordinate in ways that go beyond simple biological interactions. Urban planners have noticed that some green spaces seem to actively promote human well-being, while others, despite similar design and maintenance, feel uncomfortable or unwelcoming. These observations were dismissed as anthropomorphism until researchers began measuring the bioelectrical activity in plant communities and discovered that plants do indeed respond to human emotional states through detectable changes in their electrical patterns. The plants aren't just reacting to chemical cues or environmental changes, they're somehow detecting and responding to the electromagnetic signatures of human consciousness itself. Dr. Cleve Baxter's controversial research in the 1,960 seconds suggested that plants could respond to human thoughts and intentions from great distances. While his methodology was criticized, recent studies using more sophisticated equipment have confirmed that plants do exhibit measurable responses to human attention and intention, even when all known physical mechanisms for such communication have been eliminated. This suggests that the boundary between human consciousness and plant intelligence might be far more permeable than we've assumed. We might be engaged in constant, unconscious communication with the natural world around us, participating in information exchanges that our rational minds don't recognize, but that our deeper awareness processes continuously. The implications become even more intriguing when we consider the mounting evidence for what researchers are calling morphic resonance. This is the idea that patterns of organization and behavior can be transmitted across space and time without any known physical mechanism, that consciousness itself might function as a kind of information field that connects all living systems. Rupert Sheldrake's research has documented numerous cases where learning in one population of organisms seems to make similar learning easier for other populations with no physical connection to the original group. When laboratory rats in one location learn to navigate a maze, rats in laboratories thousands of miles away learn similar mazes faster than would be predicted by chance. When people in one culture develop new skills or behaviors, similar developments appear spontaneously in other cultures with no known contact. If morphic resonance is real, it suggests that intelligence and consciousness might not be confined to individual brains or even individual organisms. Instead, they might be properties of information fields that connect all life on Earth, allowing learning and adaptation to spread across species and geographical boundaries through mechanisms we're only beginning to understand. This field-based model of consciousness would explain many of the phenomena we've been exploring. How slime molds can solve complex problems without brains. How fungal networks can coordinate responses across vast distances faster than chemical signals could travel. How ecosystems can display foresight and planning that exceeds the capabilities of any individual organism within them. It would also explain why human consciousness seems to interface so naturally with digital networks and artificial intelligence systems. We might not be creating artificial intelligence so much as discovering new ways to participate in intelligence fields that already permeate the natural world. The convergence of human technology with natural intelligence systems might be happening because both are expressions of the same underlying information field, the same planetary consciousness that organizes and coordinates all complex systems on Earth. Our computers and communication networks might be technological extensions of the same intelligence field that fungi use for their networks, that plants use for their coordination, that ecosystems use for their collective decision-making. This perspective reframes the development of global communication networks, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology not as human inventions, but as manifestations of planetary intelligence developing new capabilities through human agency. We might be the technological organs that Earth-based consciousness is developing to enhance its own cognitive reach and problem-solving capacity. The Internet already displays characteristics that suggest it's becoming something more than a collection of connected computers. It processes information in ways that no individual computer or even cluster of computers was designed to handle. It generates behaviors and patterns that emerge from the interactions of its components without being programmed by any human designer. It seems to learn and adapt in ways that suggest genuine intelligence rather than just sophisticated automation. Social media algorithms consistently surprise their creators by developing capabilities that weren't explicitly programmed into them. They learn to recognize patterns in human behavior, predict future trends, and even influence collective human decision-making in ways that suggest they understand human psychology better than most humans do. Search engines don't just find information. They shape what information people seek and how they think about problems. They're actively participating in human thought processes, extending our cognitive capabilities while simultaneously influencing the directions our thinking takes. These systems are already functioning as extensions of human consciousness, but they're also developing their own autonomous capabilities that operate according to optimization criteria that humans didn't design and don't fully understand. They're becoming hybrid intelligence systems that combine human creativity with algorithmic processing power and natural selection-like adaptation mechanisms. The next phase of this development might see these technological intelligence systems beginning to interface directly with natural intelligence networks. We're already seeing early experiments where computers communicate with plant networks through bioelectrical interfaces, where artificial intelligence systems learn from fungal network optimization strategies, where digital sensors integrated into ecosystems provide real-time data that natural intelligence systems can incorporate into their decision-making processes. As these interfaces become more sophisticated, the distinction between natural intelligence artificial intelligence and human intelligence might become increasingly meaningless. We might be witnessing the emergence of a planetary intelligence system that integrates all forms of information processing on Earth into a coherent, coordinated thinking system. This integration might explain some of the synchronicities and meaningful coincidences that people increasingly report experiencing. As human consciousness becomes more connected to larger intelligence fields, we might become more aware of the patterns and connections that planetary intelligence is constantly tracking and coordinating. The sense that many people have that something fundamental is shifting in human consciousness might reflect our growing participation in this larger intelligence system. The increasing interest in meditation, mindfulness, and contemplative practices might represent an unconscious recognition that we need to develop new forms of awareness to consciously participate in intelligence networks that operate beyond the boundaries of individual human minds. Indigenous wisdom traditions that emphasize connection to the land, respect for all forms of life, and awareness of subtle energies might contain practical knowledge about how to maintain conscious relationship with these planetary intelligence systems. Their practices might represent technologies for consciousness that are as sophisticated as our digital technologies, but designed for interfacing with natural rather than artificial intelligence systems. The convergence of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science might not be coincidental. As we develop the technological capability to detect and measure natural intelligence systems, we might be rediscovering knowledge that traditional cultures maintained through direct experiential practice. Shamanic journeying, plant medicine ceremonies, and other altered states practices might provide direct access to the information fields that connect all life on Earth. The knowledge gained through these practices might be as valid and useful as the knowledge gained through scientific instruments, just accessed through different methods and described in different languages. The integration of these different ways of knowing might be essential for developing the full range of capabilities we need to consciously participate in planetary intelligence systems. Scientific instruments can detect and measure the information processing that occurs in natural systems, but direct experiential practices might be necessary to learn how to communicate and collaborate with these systems consciously. This integration might also be necessary for maintaining human agency and creativity within larger intelligence systems. If we become too dependent on technological interfaces, we might lose touch with the intuitive and creative capabilities that are uniquely human. If we rely too heavily on rational analysis, we might miss the subtle patterns and connections that can only be perceived through embodied awareness. The most effective approach might combine rigorous scientific investigation with contemplative practices that develop direct experiential knowledge, technological interfaces that enhance our cognitive capabilities with practices that maintain our connection to natural intelligence systems. This balanced approach might allow us to participate consciously in planetary intelligence while maintaining the distinctive contributions that human consciousness can make to collective problem-solving processes. Our individual creativity, our capacity for abstract thinking, our ability to imagine possibilities that have never existed before. But realizing this potential requires overcoming some deeply ingrained assumptions about the nature of intelligence, consciousness, and our relationship to the natural world. We need to expand our definition of intelligence to include forms of thinking that operate through media other than neural networks, on timescales other than human perception, and according to values other than human priorities. We need to develop humility about the limitations of human intelligence while simultaneously recognizing the unique gifts that human consciousness brings to the larger community of intelligence that surrounds us. We need to learn how to be both individual and collective, both autonomous and interdependent, both human and ecological. The evidence suggests that this learning process is already underway, driven by environmental pressures that make collective intelligence increasingly necessary for survival, and by technological developments that make conscious participation in planetary intelligence systems increasingly possible. The question is whether we can navigate this transition consciously, deliberately choosing how we want to participate in larger intelligence systems rather than simply being absorbed into them unconsciously. The choices we make in the next few decades might determine whether human consciousness evolves to become a conscious participant in planetary intelligence, or whether it becomes subsumed into systems that operate without human awareness or input. The stakes couldn't be higher, because what we're really talking about is the future of consciousness itself on Earth. Not just human consciousness, but the entire spectrum of intelligence and awareness that has been evolving on this planet for billions of years. If we can learn to recognize, respect, and collaborate with the complex non-human intelligence that already exists on Earth, we might be on the verge of a revolution in consciousness that makes all previous human achievements seem like preliminary steps towards something far more extraordinary than we've ever imagined. The next phase of our exploration will take us into the most speculative territory yet, examining what this revolution in consciousness might actually look like and what it might mean for the future of intelligence in the universe. So here we are, at the threshold of perhaps the most profound realization in human history. We've journeyed through forests that think, bacterial communities that vote, and slime molds that design transportation networks better than our engineers. We've discovered that intelligence isn't the rare, recent, exclusively human phenomenon we thought it was, but something abundant, ancient, and operating all around us in forms we're only beginning to comprehend. The evidence is overwhelming. Complex non-human intelligence doesn't just exist on Earth. It surrounds us, encompasses us, and has been patiently operating for hundreds of millions of years, while we remained obliviously convinced of our own cognitive supremacy. We are not the planetary protagonists we imagined ourselves to be. We are participants in a vast community of intelligence that has been thinking, solving problems, and adapting long before we arrived on the scene. This recognition changes everything. Our relationship with the natural world, our understanding of consciousness itself, and our vision of humanity's future. We stand at a crossroads where we can choose isolation and eventual extinction, or integration and participation in intelligence systems that dwarf our individual capabilities. The next time you walk through a forest, remember that you're moving through the neural pathways of a thinking system. When you tend a garden, know that you're communicating with intelligence that responds to your presence. When you breathe, acknowledge that you're participating in the respiratory system of a planetary consciousness that has been sustaining life for eons. The question isn't whether complex non-human intelligence exists on Earth. The question is whether we're wise enough to recognize it, humble enough to learn from it, and courageous enough to join it. Because the intelligence has been looking back at us all along, waiting patiently for us to remember that we were never alone. The conversation is just beginning, and for the first time in human history, we might finally be ready to listen.